There were so many hooks. Ever been hooked by a fishing hook before? Most of the time, you don't even know it's there until you see it, stuck right into the back of your hand, leg, wherever else it decides to latch on. Time to time, I think I feel one of those hooks latching onto my right arm, and it puts me in a panic every time. I get nightmares of being taken away by them, just pulled out the window and gone. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me go back about 7 months ago. My name's Nathan. Back in early August, my grandfather passed away from heart failure at 73. In Newfoundland, that's pretty rare. Most people don't even make it that far before heart problems catch up with them. He was more than just a grandfather to me. He was the reason I made it through a lot of tough times after my father left when I was just 8. He did everything in his power to keep my mom and me afloat, and 20 years later, he was still supporting us in every way he could, never asking for anything in return. Hell, the only reason I didn't know what happened to him sooner was because he was on his way to celebrate with me. I just landed a new job I'd been working toward for months, and he wanted to mark the occasion. He hopped in his old truck to grab a small cake, but he passed away at a red light before he could even get home. He was one of a kind. Losing him felt like part of me was ripped out, leaving a massive hole. After his burial, we did what we could to sell whatever he had. House, truck, tools, we just didn't have space for it, and it took some time to pull off. It also hurt a little giving up his things. That's when I found his old key ring. I was nearly done packing the bags when I heard it, the kitchen window shattering into 1,000 pieces. Glass and wood was thrown into the cabin, so suddenly I thought something had exploded behind me, making me jolt away from the sound before turning to it. The damn moose was there. I knew it was because the moment I looked toward the window, I could see just the smallest piece of its antlers poking inside before it pulled it back outside. Before I could react, I heard another window smash, then another. For whatever reason, the moose outside had smashed almost all of the windows, and yet I still could not hear anything from it, not a single step. Fuck this, I remember muttering to myself. I shoved the couch out of the way with all my might and kicked the wall where the boards hit it, shattering them with one good kick. If I had to kill a moose to get out of there, then god damn it, that's what I was going to do. I grabbed the rifle and grabbed one of the already loaded clips for it. Loading the rifle was difficult, but I managed in the end, pulling the slide back then forward again to get it ready. I haven't used it that much, but my grandfather showed me how to properly use it before. Nothing changed since then. I figured if the moose was anywhere, it would be near the shed. It did smash out the bedroom and bathroom windows, which were close to it, so that was where I would check first. With the butt of the rifle to my shoulder, I swung the front door open and made my way towards the back end of the cabin. As I got closer, I could finally start hearing it, or something at least. They weren't for his truck, he never had spares for it, but to the cabin he used to own. In Newfoundland, cabins are common. People use them to escape for a while or, for some, to go moose hunting. Something banging on the other side. With a loud pop and bang, I realized what it was. The moose was slamming its head into the generator and had killed it. Why the hell it was doing that I had no idea, but I knew I had to act fast. Reaching the corner of the cabin, I was finally in sight of the damn thing. But God, do I wish I never did now. The moose, this hulking beast of an animal, stood tall over the now dead generator, raising its head up high now that it was done beating it to death before slowly turning its head towards me. One of its antlers had snapped off at the base from repeatedly slamming it into the generator, leaving just a sharp stub sticking out of its head. But that was nothing compared to the rest of the sight. Its fur was patchy, missing in some places, revealing pale raw skin beneath with spots of rot and decay. The moment it had turned its head towards me, I could see a part of its lip was hanging loose, bits and pieces of it torn up and with old blood gunk up. And its eyes, God, those nearly pure white eyes, staring blankly back at me as it stood there. This moose had been dead for some time now, and holding it up were hundreds, maybe thousands of these hooks and lines scattered all across its body, suspending it upwards like a puppet with its feet never actually touching the ground, only looking like it was even on the ground to begin with. All of these super thin lines shot straight up into the air like all of the other ones I had seen by then, controlling every movement this moose made. My grandfather wasn't much of a hunter, but he'd slip out there every now and then to get away. No wonder it looked off to me when I first spotted it. I stood there frozen, rifle aimed at the abomination before me. Its hollow eyes met mine, and in that moment, time felt like it stopped. My breath was trapped in my chest, my hands cold as ice as I held that rifle. I squeezed the trigger before I even understood what was going on and watched as the round landed right into the thing's right eye with a small wet pop before exiting the other side. A small bit of old gunk-up blood pouring out where the eye once was. There was no reaction, no twitch, no flinch, nothing. It simply stood there, unfeeling, unaffected by the shot that would have killed most musai. I reacted by cocking the gun, pulling then pushing the slide back in place to ready another round as it kept its dead sight on me. The next round hit its rib cage, a small splatter of blood, but no exit wound this time as I cocked the rifle yet again. The best way I can explain how this thing moved is again like a puppeteer, simply swung it towards me, lunging forward and forcing myself to jump back out of its reach as it slammed into the corner of the cabin. It bounced off the corner of the cabin like some crazed marionette, its movement odd and awkward at the same time as the hooks attached to it guided it back my way. In my moment of panic, I walked quickly backwards, trying to get the rifle up fast enough to take another shot as the gun let out another snap. The bullet hit the rotten piece of the moose's back, and I watched as it tore a large chunk off and shot straight up into the sky like trash caught in high wind. The amount of lines and hooks that went with it must have off-balanced the thing, shifting its weight to the side as it once again rammed into the cabin wall with an unsettling force where it paused for a brief moment. I remember a few times he took me there. One of those trips was when he tried to teach me to drive at 16. I remember my hands were shaky, but not enough for me to cock the rifle one more time. The moment the next round was ready, I watched in horror as this massive dead beast was simply pulled up into the air and out of sight. It was simply gone. I frantically looked everywhere for that thing, unsure if it was just gone or waiting for me to fuck up and surprise me. It took me a bit, but I considered everything in the cabin a lose as I made a mad dash for the truck, rifle in my left hand, while right hand dug in my pocket for the keys, panic making everything so much harder to find. I had just barely managed to pull the keys free when it returned. It plummeted from the sky like some sort of twisted Ferris wheel, crashing into the side of the truck with a deafening impact. The impact drove the truck nearly 7 feet to the side with enough force to almost flip it onto its side. I was mere inches away from it when it hit the door, forcing me to leap back and fall on my ass before stumbling back to my feet again. The moose was barely unrecognizable. Both of its shattered antlers were almost nearly gone at this point, and the remnants of its skin clung to its body in patches, revealing broken bones, exposed ribs, and rotting flesh. Fragments of its skull and ribcage jutted from its body like broken shards of glass. I tried to raise my rifle once more, but before I could fire, it was on me. The force slammed into me, pushing me backward until my back crashed into the cabin window and shattering the glass in an instant. The rifle slipped from my hands, and in that brief moment of disorientation, I struggled to catch my breath. There was no time to think, no time to plan, no time to wait. That lesson ended quickly when I went just a little too fast and crashed his truck into one of the trees in the area. I did the only thing I could. I ran back inside. I sprinted back inside, my heart pounding, and reached the makeshift sink as the creature crashed into the door. It hit with such force that the wood exploded, splintering and cracking as it attempted to force its way inside. The only way for me to explain the situation was like watching someone control a puppet and trying to make them walk into a small house where the strings could get into, making parts of its limbs just drop and act dead on the spot as the lines attached to it dug into the wood. It struggled to get inside for a while before becoming lifeless, dead in its spot. It didn't take long before all of the hooks and line attached to the corpse dragged it back outside and straight up in the air once again, not a sound to be made. The best way I could describe what I was witnessing was like watching someone manipulate a puppet, trying to force it to walk into a tiny house. The strings tangled and got caught in the roof and ceiling, causing parts of the puppet's limbs to suddenly go limp and hang dead as the lines pulled tight against the wood. It struggled for a while, trying to force itself inside, but eventually it went completely still, lifeless, frozen in place like a real corpse. It didn't take long before the hooks and strings that had been attached to its body yanked it back out, lifting it up into the air without a single sound. I stood there in silence, overlooking the chaos that was left behind by this thing. Splattering of old rotting blood, small bits and pieces of fur and flesh, along with scattered wood and glass from the window and door. My breath was fast, still catching up to everything that happened moments before the silence as I took a few steps forward to look outside. I'm pretty sure my mom yelled at him the entire day we got back, but all he cared about was that I was fine in the end. I kept a bit of distance from the doorway still, giving myself enough space in case it came back with another surprise attack as I scanned the area. There was nothing, just dead silence. That silence lasted only a moment before a loud and sudden bang echoed from outside the cabin, as a round from the rifle went off and ripped through the wall beside me before ending up inside the kitchen wall on the other side, wherever the corpse when it had taken the rifle straight up with it before hitting the ground with such force to set off the loaded round live in the chamber. Won't lie, I think I pissed myself from that honestly. After both near-death experiences, I ran to the couch and shoved it in front of the front door before grabbed the old bed and propping it up against the window as well, blocking any sight of that beast if it was to come back before tucking myself into the very corner the couch was in before all of this. It was the safest place in my mind, furthest from the windows and door leading outside where that thing could potentially get me. I was stuck in this cabin. I didn't dare to try and leave as the hours dragged on. Day became night, and I risked it to get to the wood stove to light it up, giving me some better vision of the area around me inside the cabin. I barely moved, stunned by everything that had led to this, as the realization I was stuck here started to leak into my mind. There was nothing I could do but sit here and wait, waiting for something to happen as I made the bottle of Screech my only friend in this world now. My truck was completely fucked after what that thing did to it, and it was the only safe way for me to get out of this place. I couldn't just run away with a corpse like that flying around here to pounce when it was time, plus how many of those hooks were outside as well. The cabin was about an hour outside of his hometown, down a dirt road that barely even qualified as a road. You could easily miss it if you weren't looking for it. I only bumped into a few of them, and all I know they could be anywhere. I was stuck here. I must have drank half the bottle that night, pausing every moment I heard something outside or mumbling to myself about things long past. Did my grandfather know about this? What was controlling that thing outside attacking me? Should I leave a message in case someone finds me? I had so many thoughts running through my mind as I sat there, the glow of the wood stove lighting the room around me as I checked my phone for the time. I don't remember much in that moment being piss drunk, but seeing my phone somehow gave me the idea of calling for help. I had to shake my drunken mind away and really think of how I was going to pull this off. If I could get a single 911 call out maybe, just maybe I could get someone here to save me. It was a long shot, but it was the only shot I had. The only real problem was getting a signal. I knew where I could get even a small one, but that's what made it so much worse to think about it. It was my only chance to get out of here, and I had to at the very least try. My body felt heavy, exhausted even the more I tried to get myself up off the floor. A plan set in stone, but unsure if I can even pull it off. It was in the perfect spot, just far enough away from everything, surrounded by trees for cover, but still close enough to the shoreline if you felt like fishing. Out the kitchen window was all I needed to reach out to. That was all I had to do. I can pre-dial the number and wait until I got a signal before pressing call on the phone to try and contact someone to help. But the more I looked towards the shattered kitchen window, the more fearful I became. Frightened of that thing just being around the corner and hitting when I was at my weakest. My hands were shaking as I got the phone ready. Only 10% power left was enough to get a phone call out as I dialed in the number. I kept my thumb over the call button on the screen as I crept up to the window and slowly stretched my right arm little by little outside of the wrecked frame. I kept scanning the area, keeping an eye out for the corpse to return and attack me as I reached further and further outside. My hope was fading pretty quickly the further I stretched myself out that window, trying not to cut myself on the glass until I saw it. A green signal bar popping up on the top right of the screen as I press call on the screen. The relief that overcame when I heard the sound of the phone ringing was like a rush, but only for a moment. The phone slipped from my grasp as a surge of pain coursed through me, intense and blinding, as though every nerve ending in my arm was being pulled and twisted. I looked down in horror to see hooks anchoring into my skin, spreading from my shoulder all the way to my fingertips, piercing deeper with each pull. Instinctively, I tried to wrench myself free, but the hooks resisted, tugging me back with a violent force instead. And now, here I was, holding the only set of keys he had for it. I didn't tell my mother about the cabin, even though now I wish I did. If my left arm hadn't been braced against the cabin, I would have been dragged right out, pulled into the dark with no hope of escape. The pain was so overwhelming that for a moment I thought I might collapse from sheer agony. The pain was unbearable. It felt like I was being ripped apart little by little. Even though I was fighting for my life, something in my mind shifted from being frightened to fighting back. I wasn't going to be some puppet, dragged away and strung up like that damn moose. I was going to get away from this one way or another. With every ounce of strength I started to pull with all my might. Intense pain jolting through me more and more as I pulled, but I couldn't stop. I managed to get my foot up on the wall for leverage, giving me extra strength to work with as I started to pull with everything I had. I yanked myself back inside. My body slammed against the floor and came to a stop in the corner where the couch once was, as my breathing became ragged, exhaustion taking over me as I laid there. As the adrenaline started to fade, that's when I felt the full force of the pain. I had to pull myself up with my left arm before seeing my right arm shredded to pieces. Strips of skin were missing all the way from my shoulder to my fingers. On top of that, I had pulled with such force, I lost the top of my middle finger and my ring finger. Only half of them remained. Blood was rushing with the beat of my heart, and as my heart rate increased, I had to do what I could in pure agony. The moment was a blur to me. A bad panic of trying to stop the bleeding, while thoughts of bleeding out ran through my mind. But at the time, I didn't know if the cabin had been sold, given to one of us, or just left to rot. What I do remember was one idea of just pouring the remaining bottle of Screech over the wounds and shoving my arm into the wood stove, burning the wounds closed to stop the bleeding. But even I knew that was a terrible idea and would have only made more problems. Instead, I must have just wrapped it up the best I could and poured, I think, what was rubbing alcohol all over the cloth I used, which turned out to be a bed sheet and a t-shirt, before passing out from that alone. Time was a blur at that point. I remember laying on that floor for a long while. Other times I remember struggling to open and cook canned and bottled goods I brought with me. I think I even wrote a letter to my mother at one point, fearing that I wasn't coming out of this alive. I didn't think I was at that time. The final night I do remember pretty clearly. The pain in my right arm started to get worse, as I laid there maybe either half dead or half asleep. The fire in the wood stove had died out, and the only thing I could hear was the rustling of the trees from the wind outside. I was ready for death to take me as I laid there, but the longer I waited, the more light I started to notice. I thought I was hallucinating when this all happened. It wasn't until I heard the officer's voice yell out before coming inside. Before I knew it, I was waking up in a hospital bed, the lights nearly blinding me when I finally woke up. The RCMP officer who spoke to me in the hospital explained that my 911 call did get through. They heard a struggle on the line, but the call dropped before they could track it down properly. They had only a vague idea of where the cabin was, which is why it took them so long to find me. The urge to go there one more time before it was potentially taken away from us was stronger than anything else. I had to go. But they found me just in time. I told them everything. The hooks, the moose, the damage to my arm, everything. I'm not sure if they believed me, but they knew something had happened. The doctors said I was lucky I didn't bleed out from how much was torn away on my arm. The doctor probably didn't buy my story either, but that didn't matter. All he needed to do was help me recover. I stayed in the hospital for a while. I was too terrified to leave and was convinced that whatever attacked me was still out there. My fear kept me in that sterile room an extra day or two, even though I was physically well enough to go. It wasn't until my mother insisted I leave that I finally agreed in hesitation, and I went to stay with her for a few more days before heading back to my own home. It's been 7 months since then. Writing all of this down has been difficult, and doing what I just did was even harder. Part of me wants to believe it was just some twisted figment of my imagination, a way for my mind to shield me from what really happened. But I know what I saw. the hardest part. I can't prove any of it anymore. The cabin is gone. I just returned from driving out there, hoping for any shred of evidence that it was real. But when I got there, it was gone. No remains, no pieces of the cabin, just nothing. It was as if it had never existed. I called everyone in the area and no one knew anything about it, not even the RCMP, who'd investigated the site days after they found me. According to them, the cabin should still be there. But it was. The plan was simple. I told my mother I was going out of town to meet up with an old high school friend who was getting married soon, but also to clear my head from everything so far. The only thing I found was a single, small fishing hook, tightly tied to a frail line. I would be gone for 4 days, enough time to drive there, stick around for a day or two, and then drive back without her knowing. She didn't question it. I booked the time off and I headed out when the time came. I overpacked, of course. Instead of bringing just a few days' worth of food and water, I ended up with 6 days' worth of water and food. I also brought a fresh bottle of Screech and enough gasoline to keep the small generator my grandfather had up there running the entire time I was there. I did all of this in the next town over just to make sure my mother wouldn't catch me packing supplies for the cabin. Once I had everything, I hit the road. I didn't stop until I reached that dirt road my grandfather had used for years. I've always hated that road. It was so bumpy it felt like I was getting whiplash every few minutes. My forgotten cold coffee didn't stand a chance the moment I got on that dirt road, flying everywhere within the first few minutes and making a mess I couldn't clean up until I was done getting to the cabin. Even after all these years, seeing the cabin still standing felt surreal. Its bright blue exterior stuck out against the surrounding trees. It wasn't big, but that was part of its charm. All you needed in a cabin like this was a place to sit, cook, eat, sleep, and well, shit. Anything beyond that was an unnecessary luxury. Behind the cabin, my grandfather had a small shed where he kept his tools and the generator that powered the lights and mini-fridge. The generator could run for about 10 hours, but I wasn't planning on running it that long, but if I did, I brought enough gas to make it last, especially for some late-night drinking. I stepped up to the door, unlocked it, and swung it wide open to let in the fresh air. Inside, there was a small countertop on the right, enough space to prepare food, and a makeshift sink made from a cheap bucket, and a couch to the side tucked into the corner of the cabin's living room. No plumbing, of course. We always had to bring our own water for drinking and washing. There was also a makeshift shower near the shed, and an old outhouse, a little further out, which I had to spray down with bug repellent. The bathroom built in the cabin was nothing more than a seat with a bucket for those frigid winter nights, if you didn't want to freeze your ass off in the snow. No one used it as a bathroom, honestly, so we just used it as a small storage room. The cabin only had 4 windows, one in the front, one in front of the kitchen sink, and 2 small ones in the bedroom and bathroom. My grandfather didn't keep much here. There was a small coffee table, a love seat, and 2 folding chairs. The centerpiece of the cabin, though, was the old wood stove, which had probably been there longer than my grandfather. It was a sturdy and heavy wood stove with a flat top to boil your water for tea or cook any meal you wanted. He always preferred to cook on that thing than any electric stove top we brought, even if it meant burning everything that touched it. There was one other thing in the cabin I had to check, though. One thing my grandfather showed me and told me to keep a secret even from my mother. Once you moved the couch out of the way, you could find 2 boards in the wall that stuck out from the others, that were not nailed in, but screwed into the walls. A quick twist with an old screwdriver, and I had access to my grandfather's rifle he had tucked away in the wall for safekeeping. He knew all about Canadian gun laws and the need to keep ammo and weapons separate, but he didn't care much for the rules. The rifle he owned wasn't registered, and it was an old Ross rifle, the same kind used by the Newfoundland military in World War I. The fact that he had one and it still worked amazed me. It came with the cabin, he told me once, which made me question just how old this cabin really was. I knew the cabin had been fixed up a long time ago, but old enough to last since World War I. For now, I just screwed the boards back on and left the rifle there. I had no reason to have it out right now and tucked the couch back in its place to hide it. Once I was done inspecting the inside of the cabin and headed back outside to grab everything I packed, it was then it started to happen. I didn't notice the hook hanging there dead center to the door when I was leaving, and right away, It sliced the right side of my face, right on my cheek. It stung like hell, and touching where it cut me, I could already feel a small bit of blood on my fingertips. I wasn't sure where it came from, but I remember thinking to myself how much it would suck to leave just for a tetanus shot. I grabbed the line that the hook was attached to, wrapping it around my hand, and gave it a tug, trying to pull it free from wherever it was tied to. But the more I tugged, the less sense it made. I figured it was probably attached to the wall or maybe even the roof for some strange reason. But every time I pulled, it felt a little too loose. Finally, with one good yank, I ripped it free. The long, nearly invisible line dropped in front of me. It was much longer than it should have been. I could have easily wrapped it around the entire cabin without a problem. I figured it was just an extra bit of line left by my grandfather, or whoever had put it up, who hadn't bothered to trim it down. I coiled it up, tied it off, and tossed it beside the front door for later. I'd deal with it properly once I was done unpacking the truck. I was exhausted. I needed food, and thanks to that damn hook, a Band-Aid. Unpacking was quick. Even setting up the gas generator my grandfather had was easy enough. Once everything was inside and the generator was roaring, I got to work cleaning up and eventually cooked myself dinner. When night rolled around and I was ready to sleep. As much as I wanted to stay awake a little longer, my body was begging for a nap after being on the road for so long. So I slipped outside, turned off the generator for the night, and headed to the cabin door. As soon as I reached the door, I spotted something at the very edge of my sight. It was pretty dark outside, but I could have sworn I saw something at the tree line. So I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight mode, pointing it in the direction I saw whatever it was. To my surprise, I could make out what looked like a moose standing in the distance. Newfoundland is known for its moose population. There are so many now that they've become a real problem, especially for drivers. But this was the first time I'd seen a moose near the cabin like this. Now thinking about it, I think this was the first time I've seen any animal near the cabin, and there was a full-grown moose in the distance, maybe looking in my direction. I quietly stepped inside, locked the door, and brushed it off. I didn't think much of it at the time. I was tired, and my only focus was getting to bed to enjoy my time at the cabin for the next few days. I had a plan, and no moose was going to stop me at this point. The next morning, I was still partly waking up when I went outside to grab some wood for the stove. I was already craving a cup of tea, and as I made my way toward the back of the cabin, I felt another sudden sting, this time from the top of my right hand. This one stung like hell. I think it was the jolt from it that made me jerk my hand away, and made things worse as the hook poked through the other end of my skin. This one was a lot thicker compared to the first one that got me, and it stung like hell. Looking at the hook embedded in my skin only made the pain worse. I knew I had to break the line before I could do anything else, and coiled it up a bit in my left hand to give it a tug, trying to pull it free. Nothing. In fact, it felt like the line was pulling back slightly as I tried again. I couldn't figure out where it was tied, but I kept pulling, thinking it was probably attached to the roof or something. It didn't take me long to realize the line wasn't attached to the roof at all this time. The line was coming from the sky. For a second, I convinced myself the wind must have blown it out from a tree or something. I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, making it look like the line was hanging from the sky. But deep down, I knew what I was looking at, and I won't lie. It scared the hell out of me. I gathered all my strength and pulled on the line until it snapped, much like the first one I found. This line was longer, though. I didn't waste any time and headed inside to grab my pliers. I needed to cut the hook off thanks to the barbed end it had. If I just pulled it out, it would just rip through my skin more than anything. But with the hook being thicker this time, it took a bit out of me to just cut it in half. I did, thankfully, pulling both pieces out and throwing it into the trash. I wasn't sure whether I should get it checked out. It was a pretty big hook, and who knew how long it had been there. But I also did want to just leave and waste an entire day getting it checked out either. I decided to check my phone and see if I could find a quick answer. Instead, I was greeted with no signal, forgetting I was in the middle of the woods where it would be pure luck to get one out here. I walked all around the inside of the cabin for the smallest signal at first before heading outside, checking every spot near there for anything before finally finding one spot that worked. It was just outside the kitchen window when I spotted the small signal bar pop up and allowed me very slow access to the internet again. I must have been out there for a little while, looking for some kind of quick answer, when something caught my eye and nearly jumped out of my skin when I noticed it finally, just barely catching my phone in the process. About 20 to 30 feet from the cabin, there was a moose, maybe the same one from the night before. It was standing motionless in the thicker part of the trees, just staring in my direction. What really shook me, though, was how quiet it was. If you've ever seen a moose, you know how loud they can be. These massive animals are hard to miss, especially where the trees are packed together in places. A moose moving around will always make some noise, but this one, it was dead silent. Something kept telling me in the back of my head that something wasn't right. Something about this moose just felt off as I made my way to the corner of the cabin. My eyes locked on it as I did. The moment I reached the corner, I was greeted with something else, another hook. This one thankfully caught the sleeve of my shirt as I tried to walk away. My immediate instinct was to pull away, let it tear through my shirt, and just not worry about it. The moment I did, I watched as the hook came free before suddenly being pulled straight up into the air and out of sight. I didn't know what I just saw at first and just stood there trying to see where it went. Where it went was up into the sky. It must have clicked in my head shortly after, because when it did, I bolted to the cabin door. Something wasn't right about this cabin suddenly, and my first reaction to it all was getting the fuck out of there. I wasn't going to stick around and find out what the hell was going on. I was going to leave and find out later if I could. I raced back inside and grabbed one of the empty bags I had brought with me, packing it with whatever I could without any real knowledge of what I was grabbing. I was more spooked by this than I thought I was now thinking about it, but God, I wished I moved a little faster when I started. I didn't even care about the generator. I figured I would leave it, let it run itself out of gas, and the problem solved. Need to go back there and shut everything down properly was being overrun by the need to simply leave.